Fiscal management. As against a total expenditure of 34.83 lakh crores of rupees projected in the BE 21-22, the revised estimate is 37.70 lakh crores. The revised estimate of capital expenditure is 6.3 lakh crores of rupees.
On more policy news, government sources say it will be very challenging to meet the fiscal deficit target for FY23. Separately, the Economic Affairs Secretary says he expects inflation to moderate in the coming months.
The overall sharp rebound and recovery of the economy is reflective of our country's strong resilience. India's economic growth in the current year is estimated to be 9.2%, highest among all large economies.
अरे कहना क्या चाहते हो?
Budget estimates. You talk about one, you'll find hundreds of them. And you'll also find a lot of learned people, some of whom will be your own office colleagues, your colony friends. Your friends group is such collectively, even your relatives. And everyone will have an opinion about this budget. Everyone will have a view about it, and rightly so, because having an opinion is everyone's fundamental right. But what exactly is fiscal deficit? What does this glide down path signify? I hope you're not expected to use a glider somewhere. What exactly is monetary and the fiscal policy? If these are the questions that you have as well, and if you wish to understand the budget and its minute intricacies, then your first step would be to thoroughly understand the various terms which will be used in the budget. While we will cover just that in today's episode, let's first start to understand what exactly is a budget. Now, at some point in our life, our elders would have prepared a budget which our parents would have followed. Our parents would have prepared a budget which you and I have been following. If most of us are at a place where we have designed a budget for our own family and our monthly expenses are within the limits of that budget. Now, any budget has two critical components. The first is the income that is earned, and the second is the expenditure. And the list of expenses is usually long, but we can only spend up to how much we have earned, right? As the saying in Hindi goes, jitni badi chadar, utne hi pair pasare. But from a budget standpoint, there are times when the government needs to spend more than it has earned. And this is where the fiscal deficit comes into play.
Oh, no.
To understand this better, let's understand what exactly is the budget once again. Just like the example that I used of our elders designing a budget for us, similarly, the government plays the role of our elders here. The government identifies the various sources of income and also understands the various expenses that it needs to incur to support growth. These expenses include the cost of construction of roads and highways, providing efficient healthcare services, hygienic food or grain supply, and a lot more, including the most critical of them all, the collective defense outlay. Now, are these one-time expenses or recurring in nature? And how many such heads does the government need to consider while estimating the cost outlay and the money required for them? While we look at that, we need to appreciate that the union budget wasn't designed and created overnight. It takes months of efforts and coordination amongst various departments, and the process was started as early as the 10th of October 2022. A similar timeline is applicable almost every year. Now, in the last week preceding the budget presentation, the entire committee stays in a secluded place which is cut off from the rest of the world so as to guard the confidentiality of the budget. Now, in the process of preparing the budget, they need to take inputs and suggestions from various ministries, industry participants, state governments, etc. And it becomes their duty to balance out these expectations in the process of designing the budget. Now, one example of the balancing act would be that you have considered the various sources of revenue and expenses to be done within a particular year and carried out the calculations accordingly. But events like the resurgence of the SARS-CoV-2, for example, can't be budgeted for. The central government, which is responsible for presenting the union budget, will at some point or other deviate from the proposed budget, and rightly so. Now, at the start of 2022 or 2020, the budget could not have factored in the effects of the COVID-induced lockdown or Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, these are examples of black swan events which can't be planned for or budgeted for. However, it becomes their responsibility to use their best guess or guesstimates in the event that such a black swan event were to occur to safeguard the economy and act accordingly. Now, to draw a parallel, this is like saying that the sole earning member of the family was hospitalized for a period of 2 months. How would the family plan or budget for such an event? They definitely cannot. And hence the government also works in a way where they continuously balance their expenses and revenues to avoid major economic shocks. So what do you think? Should the expenses be lesser than the revenues, or can the expenses exceed the revenues? I'm sure most of you are saying that the expenses should be lesser than the revenues, but in that case, where does the fiscal deficit feature in the whole equation? Now, if everything were to work that way, and if expenses were to be lesser than the income, then nobody would ever talk about the fiscal deficit. But the fact that we are talking about it is because our expenses as a country have been exceeding the receipts for a long time now.
No, God!
So where do we end up spending? Now, the expenses can be broken down in two broader categories. The first is the revenue expenditure and the second is the capital expenditure. Now, revenue expenditure is that part of the government spending that does not result in creation of assets. The government incurs revenue expenses to meet its operating demands. Salaries, wages, pensions, subsidies and interest payments are all examples of revenue expenditure. Capital expenditure is the money spent by the government on the development of machinery, equipment, building, health facilities, education, etc. It also includes the expenditure incurred on acquiring fixed assets like land and investment by the government that gives profits or dividend in the future. Now that we've looked at the types of expenditure, we should also look at the various sources of income, so to say. Just like expenditure, receipts or revenues are also broadly classified into two broader categories: the revenue receipts and the capital receipts. Now, revenue receipts neither create any liability nor cause any reduction in the assets of the government. Now, these are the current income receipts from all sources such as tax and the non-tax receipts. Tax receipts are further classified into direct and the indirect tax income. Now, direct taxes are levied on taxpayers' incomes and profits, for example, the income tax. Indirect taxes are charged on goods and services. The taxpayers pay the indirect tax to the government via intermediaries, and thus they are indirectly paid to the government. For example, GST. Non-tax receipts is the recurring income that is earned from sources other than taxes by the government. For example, interests, dividends, profits, etc. Now, the capital receipts, on the other hand, are the government revenues that either generate liabilities, which is by the way of borrowing, or they reduce your assets, which is in the form of disinvestment. Now, according to the last budget for FY 2023, the total expenditure for the period of April 2022 to March 2023 was anticipated to be at 39,44,909 crores, and the total revenues were estimated to be at 22,83,713 crores. As you can see, the expenses are clearly exceeding the revenues. Now, this difference of approximately 16 lakh and 61,000 crores is represented as a percentage of the GDP. But wait, what is GDP? GDP stands for the gross domestic product. Gross domestic product is the total monetary or market value of all the finished goods and services produced within a country's borders in a specific period of time. Now, as a broad measure of overall domestic production, it functions as a comprehensive scorecard of a given country's economic health. Now, if the GDP of a particular country is growing year after year after year, it means that the economy is rising and the country is doing well. However, if the GDP is falling, it means that the goods and services produced within the particular economy are not being sold. The lower sales would translate to lower earnings, which would eventually hamper the purchasing power within the economy. Now, the GDP is important because it gives information about the size of the economy and how an economy is performing. The growth trends are used by the government to formulate various policies, as lower growth indicates the shortcomings within the economy. Now, to overcome these shortcomings, the government introduces multiple policies. The policies can be broadly classified into monetary and fiscal policy. Now, the monetary policy is the policy laid down by the central bank for the management of money supply within the economy. Every time the money supply in the economy increases, the purchasing power within the economy also increases, wherein more and more individuals are looking to spend more on the same goods. Now, this would lead to a rise in the prices of the goods, and this rise in price is what is known as inflation. Now, the RBI, to combat this inflation, increases interest rates so that the money supply can be absorbed from the economy. Now, the decision to increase the interest rates by the RBI is what is called the monetary policy. Now, the fiscal policy, on the other hand, is defined as the policy under which the government uses instruments of taxation, public saving and the public borrowings to achieve various objectives of the economic policy. Simply put, it is the policy of the government spending and the taxation to achieve sustainable growth. Now in India, GDP is counted almost every 3 months, which is once every quarter. Now there are two types of GDP. One is the nominal GDP and the other is the real GDP. Nominal GDP is the total value of all goods and services produced in a given time period. Now the GDP is the monetary value of all the goods and services produced in the country. Real GDP is the inflation adjusted GDP of a country. Now there are multiple methods used to calculate the GDP, which is the expenditure method, the income method, the value added approach, etc. However, we would leave the process of calculations for the experts. Now as per the last budget, until March 2023, our GDP was estimated to be at 258 lakh crores. When we look at the 16,61,000 crores of deficit as a percentage of this GDP, the resultant product of 6.4% is the projected fiscal deficit for the year FY23. Now, the fiscal deficit could vary across various countries.
Coming to the budget estimates, Honorable Speaker, sir, the total expenditure in 22-23 is estimated at 39.45 lakh crores, while the total receipts other than borrowings are estimated at 22.84 lakh crores of rupees. The revised fiscal deficit, Honorable Speaker, in the current year is estimated at 6.9% of the GDP, as against 6.8% projected in the budget estimates. The fiscal deficit is in 22-23 is estimated at 6.4% of the GDP, which is consistent with the broad path of the fiscal consolidation announced by me last year to reach a fiscal deficit level below 4.5% by 25-26. While setting the fiscal deficit level in 22-23, I am conscious of the need to nurture growth through public investment to become stronger and sustainable.
Having said that, any government, and especially ours, has a fiscal deficit target of 4.5 to 5%. But if a year like 2020 comes in, where COVID-induced lockdown had sent all the budgetary estimates for a toss, it took a considerable amount of time to stabilize the ship and resume the growth trajectory from there on. And hence, a fiscal deficit which had hit a high of 9.2% at its peak has now come down to an estimate of 6.4% and is expected to make a soft landing going forward. This is what is known as the glide down path from 9.2% to sub 5% levels as per our goals. But this is not an easy process, as in the process of controlling the fiscal deficit, the government needs to balance growth, it needs to balance the aftermath of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and also take steps to manage the potential economic slowdown, which is why we keep saying that the process of designing a budget and presenting it is not at all easy. Having said that, what does it mean when the government says that it is continuing its focus to boost infrastructure? What does it mean when it says that it is looking to enhance the healthcare facilities within the country? What does it mean when a traditional agricultural economy is now looking to become a superconductor manufacturer for the world? Now, when we look at all these heads, we understand that there are multiple avenues for the government to spend on. And this fine art of managing expenses and the expectations of a citizen and an investor as well is what will be covered in the third Umpire episode, which will be released on the coming Sunday, which is the 29th of January at 11 a.m., where my colleague Merlin will cover the expectations from the Union Budget for FY24. This will be available on the Informed Investor dashboard and RNR's YouTube page as well. Additionally, our team of industry experts, RNR's own sectoral experts, will also discuss the key takeaways of the budget along with the impact on your portfolios on the 2nd of February at 12:30 in the afternoon in the form of a YouTube live session. Don't forget to log into RNR's YouTube page to witness it. Now with that, we hope that the next time somebody asks you about the fiscal deficit and its glide down path, the difference between monetary and fiscal policy and the various sources of the government's revenue, you will have all the answers readily available for them, with the hope that this budget is a reformative one. It meets our expectations in the long run and also provides you and me some relief individually. This is Raj Mehta signing off. Take care and stay invested. Thank you.
Did you like watching this video? Then download our app, Informed Investor, to watch more such informative and interesting videos.